Hello there, it's Dan here. Just wanted to quickly say before the podcast begins that this is the first time we recorded over the internet, and so it's not using our usual mics, so you'll hear some audio differences to what we usually have in the other podcasts. And as an autistic person, this sort of information matters to me, and I hope it matters to you. Let's get on with it.
Okay, so the following episode may be sensitive for those who have had or do have an eating disorder, as discussion is primarily around eating disorders and autism. If you think the content discussed could be triggering for you, please proceed with caution or just skip this episode. So today we have our second guest on our podcast. It's Jessica Horner. So Jessica is a regional storyteller scholarship recipient for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. And she's focusing her scholarship on the topic of how autistic adults go about daily life in Australia through writing, audio, and photojournalism. Just as a quick side note, though, I've looked at your photos and all your words, and it's very rare that you actually, someone who's good at both, and you are. So you've got that like it's a double threat. But anyway, let me keep going.
With the double threats back again. Okay.
You have a third one, so triple threat sounds better.
Triple
anyway,
threat.
You can get that in a second. But so you're also a freelance writer and a photographer and a visual artist with a small art business called Spoonfuls of Whimsy. And she also happens to be autistic.
That's correct. And as are we. How's it going, Jessica?
Good, thanks. How are you going?
We're going well. I think we are slightly nervous about this one because this is a topic that one of us has had experience with, one doesn't. But it's also a topic that we feel a little touchy about what we say and what we don't say.
It can be a nerve-wracking topic to cover, but I think it's a really important discussion to have.
Well, we had met each other through, you sort of consulted me as part of your sort of the story-making scholarship, and you were talking to me as a late diagnosed male. And you also recently sort of, hang on, when was that article actually posted? There was an article on ABC Every Day. What was the name of that, Bianca?
It's why I'm speaking openly about my experience with an eating disorder. I'm sure
when was that published?
About a month ago.
So it was very, very
soon.
soon.
No, maybe 2 months ago.
Okay.
It's about 2 months ago.
What was the experience of writing, and also what was the reaction to it?
I think the experience of writing it was challenging at times because I was trying to represent an experience without trying to perpetuate negative narratives about eating disorders. And that can be really tricky. I think that's why we're all a little bit nervous about this episode. But it was also very affirming to do that. It was something that I quite enjoyed the process. I was at a point in my recovery where I felt ready to talk about it, and it was well received. I was picked up by a few organisations like the Butterfly Foundation and others. So it was really affirming both personally, but also the fact that I knew it was reaching a wide audience and that people would perhaps feel more comfortable to reach out for help if they needed it, which is what ultimately was driving my desire to write the article in the first place.
Yeah, so we'll obviously post that on the show notes, of course, won't you, Dan, and also on the Facebook page. But I found it really interesting coming from someone who doesn't have experience with it, just reading through it, but also just how you said to tell your parents and admitting it to them would be letting them know, telling them that you've been lying to them so much and telling half-truths. I never thought about it that way, but it really must have been such a vulnerable position to be in.
Yeah, it is. I think something to clarify when you say you're lying is it's not necessarily a conscious lie. It's an internal lie that you tell yourself as well as everybody else, to the point that you eventually hold it in such high regard in your mind that it overwhelms you. It's what I said in the article about the voice that shouts the loudest. I had multiple mental illness issues going on at the time that I had an eating disorder, but anorexia nervosa and unspecified eating disorder as I recovered was what was the loudest voice in my brain for many, many years. And that was hard to escape.
Oh, okay.
It's interesting because I think you were talking about, I think for me, when I was in my 20s, I went through some issues with food myself, and for me, it was almost not, and all the way through, it's about knowing sort of the truth, but not wanting to acknowledge it myself as well. It's a difficult thing, and for me, I've held on to a lot of that for a very, very long time. But it's been two different kinds of
Yeah,
eating disorder. There was a few years in my early 20s where I would say, I don't know if you can call it undiagnosed anorexia. It was just I went through that period of time where I think I experienced some of that.
I think something that's really interesting when you say undiagnosed is that
Yeah.
I think it's a significant, about 1 in 5 eating disorders are undiagnosed.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure there's some statistics more specific on the Butterfly Foundation's website about that. But also within the autistic population, that number increases again.
Right.
And there's two types of lies. There's the lie that you consciously tell yourself in order to sustain behavior. And then there's the point where you're telling yourself, oh, I'm engaging in healthy behaviors, or I'm engaging in healthy behaviors that are good for me. And I actually personally had to be confronted with my own truth by going to a women's night at university when I was about 22 or 23 years old. And the keynote speaker was talking about her journey through anorexia nervosa. And I sat at the back of the room. I was running late because I'd been to the gym beforehand, which is probably fairly typical of many people with eating disorders. And I sat there going, oh gosh, tick, 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 this is me. And that's the first time I actually consciously thought to myself, oh, I have an eating disorder. So that was the turning point for me. And then it took me a little bit longer before I told my parents about it.
Okay.
I guess it's quite similar with autism as well. You have that same tick, tick, tick. You're listening or you're reading something, and it's exactly the same.
Very reminiscent. Having been through the late diagnosed process for autism, I know 6, 7, 8 years later, I think the two are very similar.
Okay. I think, boy, it's a weird thing because I don't even think about as a boy, as a young man, none of that even occurred to me. And I don't think males were ever addressed with at my age. This was back in the 80s. It was never discussed as something men would ever experience. And so for me, it was an experience of I was getting a result I was after, which was a certain look to and a certain feel and attention as well. You know, I went from post divorce, and when my parents got divorced at 9, my relationship with food changed, and it was more a comfort thing. And so I had that leading in to my teenage years, and then I moved schools, and I thought this is an opportunity for me to be different, to be something more of what I want to be, and that's sort of when that hit, that sort of experience.
Yeah, I think firstly, I'd like to validate that we don't talk enough about the eating disorder experience for males and male identifying individuals. I think it's very under recognized, but also it's a little bit like autism in that you recognize it in pieces, but also it's very like autism in the way it manifests. You start to notice one behavior or trait, and then another trait, and then another trait. And you were saying that it sort of came on gradually. I think that that's often the same type of experience that you have in other mental health conditions, but also in the autistic space. And it's where autism and eating disorders start to get really intertwined, is
Right.
when you look at the fact that the way they tend to manifest is very similar. So if you're already diagnosed autistic, it's harder to recognize the eating disorder. If you're not diagnosed autistic, but you have an eating disorder, the question becomes, do you also have a diagnosis of autism there somewhere in the mix? So yeah, it can be a chicken and egg problem, really. Like, it's like, which comes first?
And for me, it was neither, because at that time it just wasn't
And
happening.
it's not recognized. So again, that's another thing that's a parallel to autism is a lot of people aren't recognized until they're older. Like, eating behavior can be innocuous, and so things that start off innocently enough can become more charged and loaded, and over time you slowly start to realize that what started out with good intent has unraveled in an eating disorder. And in the same way, with autism, you might see traits or quirks or whatever you want to call them in childhood where you go, that child is a little bit different to what I'd expect, most kids to behave like, but you don't think anything much of it. And then you get to adulthood and all of a sudden you find out you're autistic at 27 or 37 or later.
Yeah. So is it something that's hereditary? Like, you've obviously spoken to a whole lot of different people and done your own research. Is it something that can go down in generations?
My understanding is yes, it is. That if you've had a parent or a sibling with an eating disorder, that you have a higher risk of developing one yourself. I'm not sure what the exact statistics are off the top of my head, so I won't try and estimate them. But one of the things that is worth noting is that the other thing is that children and teenagers mimic behaviours of other people regardless of their autism or non-autistic status. And autistic children in particular are going to be trying to mask. So if they have adults in their lives who have eating disorders, they may well start mimicking those behaviours as a means of trying to fit in and be like everybody else, which is such a common part of the autistic experience.
Well, I think they also, I've read many times just about, as a mother, well, they've always said as a mother, never as a father, but don't be looking in the mirror and saying, I need to do things about this. I need to lose weight or whatever because your children are watching. They don't actually say that about fathers, I guess.
No, they don't. It's a double standard for sure. It's interesting to see how they develop, and I wonder how much is nature and nurture in terms of the genetics of it.
I think we've talked about this before. The term nature via nurture. That I think it's definitely a combo, and it's also that sort of genetics can kick in through triggers that of experience in life as well. Whereas if you've got two people who are prone to whatever it is, one has a situation at home that it never occurs to them, and it never eventuates, but someone else it does.
I think that's a really good point. And one of the realities is that most eating disorders don't exist in isolation. They often exist alongside comorbid or coexisting traumas or mental health conditions. So for me, I also had generalized anxiety disorder when I was autistic, and eventually I actually got as sick as developing to intermittent psychosis. But that's a very different journey to talk about for a different day, but it was very hard to separate them out at times.
Okay, so we've kind of actually, like as we always do, Dan, we sort of jump in halfway through. So did you want to tell us, if you wanted to, about your story, sort of how it began?
Is that me or Dan?
Yes, it is you. Yeah, so it's you, Jessica. But I was saying, because Dan and I always jump in halfway through. And when I said where it all began, I'm thinking not childbirth, but actually like where your, I guess, disorder journey or autism, whichever one you would prefer to start.
We don't want to hear anything about the conception or anything like that. Just move a little bit later.
Literal in how I think. There's shades of grey in how I think. But I don't know where my eating disorder started exactly. I was a dancer for 15 years until I was 19, and there was never any eating disorder pathology in that experience.
But there probably would have been a lot of people
there was a lot
disorders.
A lot of influence of eating disorders, a lot of talk of weight. I was a very healthy, fit, active person, and I was considered a large dancer because I was post-pubescent and an adolescent. I wasn't in a child's body anymore, and that probably had subconscious ramifications for later on in my life. But I remember, I guess probably the start of the downward spiral is that I herniated a disc in my back when I was 19, which ended my dance career. And I'd never thought of dance as exercise, and I'd never really thought of myself as an athlete. I just did it because it was something that I enjoyed. In retrospect, it was probably an autism type deep dive that, something that I absolutely absorbed myself into. But from there, I'm trying to think, I got to this point where obviously you stop exercising and you've injured yourself, your weight's going to change. And that's really normal and not necessarily unhealthy in moderation. But I got to the point where I started getting sick with my health. I have a genetic disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's quite rare in the general population, but it is more common in the autistic population, which is interesting. I don't know why. But it meant that in addition to being injured, I couldn't control my health as much. And so food and exercise started becoming a way of controlling things that I couldn't control. And then I had to change universities because I had to move home to be closer to family. And then I had to deal with social isolation. And then I had to deal with another thing over here and another thing over here. And so I started grasping more and more on, food and numbers, and you can calculate foods and you can measure it, and it's something that's got patterns to it. And I think I find it really hard to look now, knowing that I'm autistic, at my eating disorder experience without seeing the autism. But I was in my very early 20s when I developed an eating disorder, but I wasn't diagnosed autistic until I was 27, and I didn't even recognize that I was autistic, and probably until I was almost 25.
That's so weird. My habitual activity is finding a topic and deep diving for X amount of time, and then getting out of the water and sometimes never returning to it. And I do, listening to this discussion, it does make me think that couple of years where I just got I deep dived into the idea of my relationship with food and wanting to divorce from it as much as I could, and it was. But then it just went away, and I think part of it went away, like you said. There's a whole lot of stacking blocks of issues and things, but it can also go the other way. I think I started my relationship started to settle, and I was getting happier in that, and so all of a sudden the needs that I had for wanting to get the attention and that sort of stuff had gone away, and it sort of went away as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think it is the experience for probably more people than we acknowledge. And it's one of the reasons that eating disorders are undiagnosed, is that they're not something you ever completely let go of. I think if you've experienced one, you'll always have days where you think a little bit more about food than maybe you should, or think about it in a slightly disordered way. But I found, I've just lost my train of thought. Cut that out.
No, we never cut these loss of trains of thoughts out. They always stay in.
Gosh, okay.
That's part of how we work.
Yeah, I think the whole bubble concept of you live in a bubble when you've got an eating disorder, and if your bubble's going well, then you might separate out from those characteristics. But if it's not, you will continue to grab onto them. And I think that's why I think, you mentioned earlier when we were talking before this podcast, Dan, that the statistics that almost 1 in 4 people who are diagnosed autistic will meet the clinical, not diagnosed with anorexia rather, will meet the clinical criteria for eating, 1 in 4 people who are diagnosed with an eating disorder will also meet the clinical criteria for autism, and an even higher percentage if you want to include ADHD, which is so often co-occurring with autism.
Do you have ADHD as well?
Yes, I do have ADHD as well. And I look back and that was part of it because it drove certain behaviours. But I think that's where you start to not be able to separate it out from autism, because we like repetitive behaviours, we like rituals, we like things that feel safe and are resistant to changing our behaviours. So all of that is, part of an eating disorder, but it's also part of autism. So it really is, where does one start and where does one end? It's what I said earlier, chicken and egg. It is very hard to separate them out, to the point that if you actually took food out of the diagnostic criteria for an eating disorder, you'd almost have a description of autism.
Oh, wow.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Everybody who's autistic has an eating has an eating disorder is autistic, but it's certainly an interesting parallel.
Yeah, I think so. It's actually, there's 2 things I want to say. So I find I think about elite athletes, and I think so many of them have autism.
Yeah.
So many, even to be a basketball or a football player, and it's all you think about and you do nothing else, and it's all you talk about. It's all you have to Surely, I don't want to diagnose people, but I feel like
No, I tend to agree that that amount of hyper focus, you almost have to be neurodivergent to have that particular trait.
But people say, like I know a few elite athletes, and they come back or they retire, and they can't. It's all still about them. It's still all about them. And people say, oh, that's because they were an elite athlete. But I think, well, but maybe they've just always been that way, and it's always just been about them because they have autism. Yeah.
Wow. I've heard stories about, from other athletes talking about, we always have this perception of athletes being very careful with their health, whereas the stories I've heard are quite the opposite of that. They will do anything to their body to win. And that hyperfixation, it's despite your health and what's good for you.
I've heard I don't know the exact numbers and whatnot in terms of statistics, but I've heard that they've done questionnaires and stuff with Olympians and asked them whether they'd shorten their lifespan in order to win, and a significantly high percentage say yes. And it's like that's a level of dedication that's really deep. And I think something that's really interesting to look back way back when I was sort of moving into athlete phase with my dancing, where I was doing up to 15 hours a week in addition to schooling. So it was pretty much my whole life outside of school, is I got better at performing as I got older, as you generally do in any, sport or activity like that you do that often. But when I was younger, I would be told, Jessica's technique is, or my parents would be told, Jessica's technique is fantastic and she has all of the moves exactly in time with the music. Her musicality is fantastic, but she needs to work on her performance ability. And it wasn't until I was a teenager that I really understood what that meant and was able to bring that into my dance. And that's when I started doing competition and ensemble dancing and that sort of thing. But as a ballerina, for a 5 or 6 year old who's autistic, to put them in ballet, it's the same routine no matter what class you go to anywhere in the world. It's the same activities one after another. You do warm-up, bar, central, pirouettes, jumps, and stage work. And that might not be exactly accurate. It's been a while since I've been in the ballet studio, but it's very ritualistic. And I think I can look back as early as 5 or 6 and see autistic traits in retrospect, but it never occurred to anyone at the time because I was a female and it was the early 90s. It was not really very much a time where females were recognized as autistic.
Yeah. So I have I knew someone who was an elite gymnast, and I guess I don't go into details of what they had to do at I think it was the VIS. I can't remember, I don't think it was the Australian Institute of Sport, but the things they had to do to lose that weight was incredible to me. So I do know those things, but I don't think that.
And the toxic atmosphere that sports like dance and gymnastics breed is definitely a contributing factor for eating disorder, because body image is a big part. Like for most people, there is. Do you mind if I bring up ARFID, Dan?
Go for it.
Yeah, there is a condition. I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but it's ARFID. It's avoidant restrictant food intake disorder, and it's more common in the autistic population than it is in the general population. And it's essentially a diagnosis of a restrictive eating disorder without any body image attachment associated with it. So it's often sensory behaviours. Behaviors and traits come out, like the need for routine or food not touching perhaps, or needing to be a certain colour food, things like that. I won't go into more detail because, I don't want to, give too much information about, how you develop that sort of eating disorder. It's not really what we're here for. But it is a common trait of autism that you have atypical eating behaviours. I think Dan was telling me it was 70%, according to one reference, that I guess you can put in the show notes, Dan. I don't know, it's your show, you decide. But yeah, it's something that is overlooked. But I actually look back at it and go, at the start of my eating disorder, that's what I had. My body image issues didn't actually come into it until I started recovering. because I didn't develop an eating disorder by intentionally losing weight. I lost weight because of a health condition very quickly.
So did you have that ARFID as a child?
No. There's certain foods I wouldn't eat. I wouldn't eat seafood. I didn't like custard. I still don't like either of those things. I won't get any tuna if you want to. Like, I can't even stand the smell of it. It's disgusting. I'm sorry. It's one of those sensory things. But again, looking back and looking at my current food behaviors where I'm not in a disordered pattern of eating, there are certain things that from a sensory perspective, I still don't enjoy. I won't avoid them at fear of death sort of levels of anxiety, but I would rather not have them around. Like, a friend of mine had a can of tuna the other day, and I was just like, oh, please take that away from me. It's just, I can't stand it. It smells awful. I won't let my parents get a tuna sub at Subway because I'm just like, nope, I can't do the smell. So, you know, I'm a bit like, I have some of those behaviors, but for me, my eating disorder came about when I lost a lot of weight because I was sick with my Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it was like a switch came on in my brain when I hit a certain point of the underweight scale, when I was below a healthy BMI, which BMI, one sec, Bianca. BMI, I like to refer to very lovingly as bullshit measurement index.
Definitely.
Because that's about how much weight I put into weight, so to speak, I give to that particular criteria, because it's just not an accurate indicator of health for anyone.
Not for anyone. I mean, even for muscle, same thing.
Exactly, yeah.
I was just going to say, talking about this, so back in the article that you wrote, I found it also interesting that you said that you were never looking in the mirror and deciding that you wanted to lose weight. That was fascinating to me as well, that you didn't look in the mirror and think, oh, I need to lose weight. And when you were losing weight, you weren't thinking, oh, I'm starting to look really good.
Yeah, I actually remember one time having to go to hydrotherapy, and I couldn't find my swimsuit like that I usually wore. And I had to find one. Mum pulled one out from when I was in my teens, and it fit me, which it shouldn't have, because I was older and, you know, differently sized. But it did, and I tried it on and burst into tears. Like, I fell apart over the fact that a swimsuit that I wore in my teens still fit me, because I felt like I wasn't in control of my body no matter what I did. But I was so intent on maintaining my unhealthy behaviors around food, because they gave me a sense of control. And control was everything. The locus of control was what I needed to stay mentally balanced. It wasn't healthy, it wasn't good, but it was what helped me feel like I could cope with life. And as soon as that, but eventually that takes over, and then life doesn't happen because you're in your eating disorder 24/7.
So is the control from the eating disorder or autism, or both?
Yes, good question. I think both. I think that, I mean, you know, we're all autistic, so we can probably all admit that we like to be, you know, in control at times. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, I found it really hard to let go of the behaviors, even when my weight was changing. So even when I was in recovery and I was working with a dietitian, I held on to things like numbers and amounts of food and different, you know, rules I developed around food and all of that sort of thing for probably a couple of years after my weight was actually back to what it was, or even a little bit higher than before I developed an eating disorder. That's where I think it went from anorexia to ARFID, because there was no longer any body image manipulation. And at the start, there was no body image manipulation. At the end, there was just this section in the middle where I became very conscious of my size and was very scared of the concept, the very idea of losing weight, gaining weight. But eventually that fear disappeared, but not the ability to let go of all the behaviors. And I think the not being able to let go of behaviors is the autistic part. It's that need for routine and that. Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting as we're talking about all this stuff, and you know, I'm 50 and I still haven't addressed most of this for myself. I've fluctuated in weight all my life, and I've never really spent a lot of time addressing that. In fact, even when I'm going through the process of NDIS. I said NBN in the podcast. NDIS. It didn't occur to me until a couple of days later when I wrote down all these particular issues that I come across. I didn't even think about that, and when I thought about it, I realised that this is my major. This is the greatest cause of my unhappiness throughout my life. And I didn't even think to actually write it down. Like, even as we're talking, I'm sitting there tearing at my thumbnail,
It's
stimming away.
And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize. Okay. I think it's so insidious because it's buried in the cultural messaging that we get. And it comes back to that thing of autistic people. What do? We mask, we camouflage, we mimic. We take on cultural cues really easily because but we don't necessarily process and understand them as well. Even as adults, I think we'd like to think that we understand them, but probably on some level we see them differently to someone who's not autistic, in that we're more literal or we're more black and white. It's more like I can either go to the gym 5 times a week or I can not exercise at all. There's no middle ground of I could just go for a walk a couple times a week. It's that all or nothing thinking that is really hard when you live in a culture that, like, I remember not that long ago being with my support worker, because I'm on the NDIS as well, and I was ordering pizza and it had the kilojoule readings on the pizza box and on the pizza app, and I handed it to my support worker and said, "Here, you order," because I didn't want to know. Yes. And you can't escape it. And I've only managed to maintain my recovery because I'm very protective. One of the rules I have with every support worker I have is no talking about fitness and health in detail unless I bring it up, and no talking about numbers and kilojoules and things like that, because it's too easy to go down the rabbit hole. And like you said, it makes you miserable. Like, it's so contrary, the behavior, because it's like, oh, I'm miserable by this thing, but I can't let go of it because it's keeping me safe, because it gives me some measure of control.
So talking about NDIS, two things, can you get on the NDIS with an eating disorder by itself? And secondly, if not, with your autism, does it help to also let them know that you have an eating disorder? Would that get you more funds? Yeah.
I'm not sure. By the time I got onto the NDIS, my eating disorder was not the biggest issue. I suspect it's like any mental health issue, that if it's acknowledged, then it's not going to do any harm, especially considering the NDIS does sometimes fund things like occupational therapy and psychology, although that can be a hit and miss kind of experience in my experiences anyway. But I think acknowledging it alongside any other mental health issues is not going to do any harm. It certainly shows, a pattern of behavior, but I think the general population doesn't make the link between autism and eating disorders so clearly. I didn't until I started looking into it. It wasn't until I came across some statistics after I'd been diagnosed and I went, hang on, there's a really big link here. And then it became like, my eating disorder, you're talking about like interests that you deep dive into earlier, Dan. My eating disorder became my special interest.
Yes.
I did biology one semester while I was in the middle of my eating disorder, and barely studied all semester and still passed with distinction because I knew so much about the topic. And that's not healthy. I don't encourage that way of studying for a biology exam. Just read the damn textbook. Yes. But, it was my whole life. And I think that perhaps was intensified by the fact that I was autistic, but I didn't know that I was autistic at the time. I was in my early 20s. I wasn't diagnosed for quite a while after that.
Which also reminds me of, I've forgotten his name, psychologist who specialises in women with autism or girls.
Tony
Attwood. He actually said, when he was talking about people with autism who then get into drugs, like his son had actually. So because it's like a special interest, like you were just talking about. You get so focused on, well, these are the medications. What medications can you take? What can't you take? That is a safe level. And he said his son was getting all of his friends saying, what recreational drugs can I mix? And he would know all of the answers, but then he starts dabbling in it and then getting worse and worse, and then full-blown drug addict. It's quite interesting.
It's such a sad story. Like, I really feel for his son and for him, because that's a horrible thing for any parent or child to go through. And one of the things is I actually consider myself an addictive personality, and a lot of people attribute eating disorders to addictive personality traits because, like, I remember when I was recovering from an eating disorder at one point, I wouldn't have a lot, but I'd have like a glass of wine each night just to relax. But I stopped doing it after about a month or so because it wasn't just something that I'd do occasionally. It's something that I had to do ritualistically. And I felt that if I kept going, I was going to start having more. And then if I kept going, it was going to become so ritualistic that if I didn't have it, I'd get panicked and stressed. And I think the anxiety that I'd been squashing with my eating disorder, I took over that with alcohol. There's a barking dog. Yes, I love it. Dogs are fun. Dogs are always allowed, even on podcasts. But yeah, it is definitely an addictive.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's. Now I've lost my train of thought. But
let me just point out that when I was recording with my daughter, we were listening to our dog, but she's a Chihuahua and barely made a sound. We could barely even register the grunting noises.
Yes.
I know these dogs.
Yeah, these ones. Yeah. Do you have any pets yourself, Jessica?
Yes, I have a 6.5-year-old cavoodle.
Oh, perfect. I love that.
He's lovely. He used to be an assistance dog and now he's just a pet. But he's a little bit too smart for his own good. And I assure you that sometimes by the end of this, he's on the table next to my couch, fast asleep with his head hanging off the edge. So I wish I could show you a photo. It's very cute, but he's just fast asleep right now.
That's cute.
But he's not on the lounge. He's on the table next to it. It's bizarre.
Okay. So back to actually, I find this really interesting. So Dan, it is really interesting that I guess with autism you never really looked into it, and also with eating disorder, and you must have been so all over the place without even knowing, Dan, that knowing that you had any of these things. And I actually am interested whether you'd like to share, Dan, have you actually spoken to your psychologist about your eating disorder, or does she know nothing about it?
I barely talk to anyone about it.
Yeah.
But I don't. I'm always really okay with it. But I don't know. It's going to have to be unpacked because it's gone. I've gone a lifetime of missing a lot of fun opportunities, like the idea of even when I was in school having to go to swimming. Things that I don't like going swimming anywhere with anyone. Anything like that. Some I hate because it means less clothing. That sort of stuff. So it's such an ongoing thing for me. I do need to spend a lot of time thinking about that and finding some peace with that as well, because that sort of fluctuating thing, and I'm sure it's a lot of other people have experienced that same thing of not wanting to look in the mirror too often and that kind of thing, other than just to try and get the beard straight.
I think that first of all, in your case, Dan, that comes perhaps, I'm just assuming here, so please correct me if I'm wrong, back to the fact that we don't acknowledge males with eating disorders or disordered eating at all. And it is a spectrum. Again, overlap with autism is a spectrum. There's disordered eating and then clinically disordered eating. And then there's non-clinical disordered eating, which is like autistic behaviors where you have certain routines and rituals around food, but it has no mental health or clinical implications and it's not affecting your health. It's just very specific ways of dealing with food. But you say you missed out on opportunities, and I felt very much the same. I look back at much of my 20s and go, I really missed out. And for me, recovery wasn't saying, oh, now I have the perfect figure and I'm perfectly happy with how I look. It was getting to that point of complete body and food neutrality. Food is energy, is fuel, is the thing that I need to get me through the day. I will eat it when I can. If I don't eat enough, I will try and eat a little bit more later to make up my energy, or I'll just eat intuitively as much as I can, which is really hard for autistic people because we have really poor what's called interoception, which is awareness of how your body is functioning on the inside. So I don't know if anyone who's autistic out there has realized that they need to go to the bathroom really urgently after sitting at a computer for 4 hours, or not felt cold or hot when everyone else does. It's the same thing with food signals. We don't necessarily feel hunger and thirst in the same ways as non-autistic individuals. And so there's all of these factors at play, but then we don't talk about it. And that's why this podcasts and conversations are important, is that we don't actually think much about it. But then like you said earlier, it causes so much misery. And it's a cultural thing that we try and blame people for their food behaviors and stigmatize it instead of just normalizing food and weight as I'm healthy and I'm active or not even active. I'm healthy and my body does what it needs to do to keep me alive.
Yeah.
Just really neutral.
Misery and joy at the same time. You talked about it being just food is just, fuel for the body. But I love cooking. And part of my joy is, getting a little obsessed with the idea of, like, at the moment I've got my fire pit and I love cooking over a fire, and all that stuff gives me joy.
I'm coming to your place for dinner then, because my dinner's going to be something out of the freezer from the microwave.
Yes, you do. Dan definitely is very, very hyper-focused on it, and the food is incredible. It looks amazing. But I don't eat the chicken, but it looks incredible.
You're vegetarian?
What a strange relationship.
Yeah.
It's just, it's the word sadomasochistic comes into it. It's like I have this love-hate relationship going with food, but then what it does, how it ends up on me is it something I don't like, it's
Yes.
total confusion for me.
I wonder how much of that is cultural messaging. Again, like for me, I mean, that's something I have a bit of fascination with cultural messaging and communications and how we interpret signals and semiotics, which is like an example of semiotics would be, we know that red means go, red means stop and green means go. And that's a symbol or sign that we recognize the meaning of without words. And that's what semiotics is about. But images are what drive most people's body image. I think the Butterfly Foundation the other day said that on a post online said that eating disorders can develop as young as 5 years of age.
Yes.
That makes me really sad, but there is no way that a 5-year-old just develops an eating disorder because of anxiety. There's got to be cultural messaging in the mix telling them, whether it's their parents or their friends or the television that they're watching or the shows that they watch on TV or on social media or whatever it is, there's got to be cues somewhere saying you need to measure up to a standard that you currently don't fit, because how else does a 5-year-old develop an eating disorder? And it makes me really sad. It's quite tragic. And I think one of the things I had working in my favor is that I had a very accepting family and a family who was very accommodating of my needs, but wouldn't tolerate the food is bad, we avoid food type mentality. They just said all food is good food.
So what happens, I guess there are probably people thinking about, whether it's their children or other family members, can you sort of pinpoint, how can you sort of help people see that they have an eating disorder early on?
Early on is the tricky part, I think, because it's like I can't even draw a line in the sand when my eating disorder began. I think as if you're a parent, I mean, I'm not a parent, so I'm saying this from a removed perspective, but if you're a parent or even an adult who just has kids around you a lot, watching what you say and do about food can be around and exercise can be really influential on how children in your sphere respond.
Yes.
But also I think things like suddenly having, you mentioned intense like of cooking, but if that suddenly comes out of nowhere and it sticks around, one of, for some people, one of the things that happens, and I mean, it happened to me, is that you have to control the food. So you cook a lot, but that's not always a bad thing, but it's just it's so nuanced. I'm trying to think how to sort of best, it's like signs like suddenly avoiding activities, like Dan said, signs like being preoccupied with weight or mentioning their weight more often than they used to, being preoccupied with how they look regardless of what their weight is. One of the most scary statistics that I know is that only 4% of people who are anorexic will be reaching the clinical criteria for BMI, which means that you could be in a overweight BMI category. I remember earlier I called it the bullshit measurement index.
Yeah.
Weight, I don't mean that that's bad. It's a neutral concept. You have to look at weight as not about size, but about health and about staying healthy regardless of what size you are. But you don't have to, but I would encourage you to.
Yes.
But yeah, that insidiousness of eating disorders just comes right from the start. And it's watching for little changes, like Dan, your kids are teenagers, for example, aren't they?
Yeah,
Or pre-adolescent?
it's 11, 14.
11,
Yeah,
14.
yeah.
So
Mine is.
that age, especially in both boys and girls, watching how they behave around food. If they suddenly go off a certain food, ask
Yes.
why. If they, and I'm not saying your kids would develop an eating disorder, but just that in any kid, like, 70 or 80%, something around that, will experience body image concerns in
Yes.
adolescence. So if not more, like, that's a very loose sort of estimate of what the statistics are, but I know that they're high.
Yep.
And so the majority of teenagers at some stage will look in the mirror and go, I don't feel comfortable with how I look anymore. That can be because of their onset of adolescence and bodies changing. That can be from peer pressure. It can be from all sorts of places.
Yeah, and also to make it a little bit even more difficult is, like, a lot of children, well, some children with autism or ADHD are on medication. So, for example, my children are, and it suppresses their appetite. And that kind of really stressed me out initially, because they're not hungry at all during the week, and they don't eat lunch at school, and they sometimes eat breakfast, sometimes not, but they'll eat their dinner. And it's not until the Saturday evening that they actually eat a big dinner.
Yeah.
My son's we're in the same situation with the medication, but with my son, no, he doesn't eat during the day, but come nighttime, oh my God, we need to hire someone else just to provide him food. And this child, and I'm leading to a point here, is he has no issues with body image or anything like that.
Yes.
This boy loves his body.
Mm-hmm.
And if he could just wander around, we call him Peter Pantsless. If we could wander around, just he would love that. And it makes me feel so good that's his experience. But as a parent, dealing with anything to do with autism, eating disorders, or whatever, or bullying at school, I think one of the contributing parts of that is an open and honest relationship with your children, where you talk openly and honestly about yourself as well. So I'm open about experiences I've gone through, which has then enabled my kids to talk openly to me. And that can then lead to a lot of positive outcomes quicker.
I think, Dan, you just hit the nail on the head. Like, I think when we talk about how do we make sure that they don't develop, it's about being a good influence to the people around us, regardless of age too, because it's not just kids. I mean, I was in my 20s when I developed an eating disorder, so it's not just kids. In fact, it's an increasing phenomenon that women and men in their 40s and 50s and 60s are developing eating disorders for the first time. But I think that idea of celebrating yourself and your traits as an autistic person is really important, and being transparent is really important. And I think that's probably what compelled me to write that article in the first place, was not a desire. Like, it made the front page of ABC, which absolutely blew me away, because I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't expect it to be read by this many people. But it also surprised me because it meant that it resonated with that many people. And that means that many people, enough people to bring it to the top read articles for the day, read that article and went, I'm going to read this to the end because there's something here that I resonate with. And that makes me both sad and excited, because sad that many people can relate, but also excited that many people can have the hope.
Yes.
And so what advice then do you have for people who are listening to this podcast and maybe they've only just now realised that maybe they do have an eating disorder? So what's your advice for their next step?
I'd say the first step is to find someone who you trust and tell them. And then make sure it's someone safe if you can. I mean, unfortunately, not all of us are lucky to have people who are going to be as maybe accommodating as my family was. I was very fortunate, and I say that in the article, that if I wasn't so sick, I would have noticed how little drama came with my diagnosis, that people just went, okay, this is a challenge, and we're gonna confront it head on, but we're gonna take it one step at a time. But I think if you don't have someone to reach out to and tell, or even if you do, I am a big advocate for the Butterfly Foundation, in that I feel that they provide some fantastic resources. They did a podcast earlier in the year, earlier in 2002, 22. Oh my gosh, 2002 was a while ago. Earlier in the year, they did a podcast where they talked about eating disorders and autism for the first time on their podcast, and it was very popular and very well received. And they do have a fairly trauma-informed and neurodivergent-informed resource list of dietitians and eating disorder specialists around the country, including ones that work with people who are neurodivergent. And they also offer short-term counselling on a phone line. I don't have the number. I think it's I can't remember the number.
Dan's going to put it in the show notes.
But they are really great. I've spoken to some of the team there. They're fantastic, and they really care about this topic. And they're there to help you. I actually would go on many a walk when I was recovering, just to walk and go and sit out on a the bench in the park and talk to them on the phone, because it was just a way of having support when I was living in a regional area where there wasn't a lot of supports available.
Okay, great.
So I think that's the thing, but it is hard. You also have to be, I think, on a level of recovery, you have to be willing to recover, which you can have all the therapy in the world, but if you don't make a decision that you want to recover, you won't, because it's just not possible. But also forgiveness and kindness to yourself, because one of the things about eating disorders is so often they're tied to this sense of perfectionism, and being willing to say, I will relinquish my need for control, but I will also relinquish my guilt and my shame, which is a big part of talking about it. You talked earlier, Dan, about talking about eating disorders, and I think I wrote that in the beginning of my article, if I remember correctly, is that the reason I didn't speak about it sooner was shame. That was personal and cultural, and I think being able to say to yourself, even if other people around you are giving you different messages, I am worthy, I am loved, I am worth recovery. That sense of bringing in that, it sounds very new agey to say it that way, but just that sense of bringing in a mindset where you're willing to be kind to yourself, because it's not a very kind process, unfortunately. It is something that takes work and intentionality. And that's something that it's why they're so hard to recover from. But I also have to say that being on the other side of recovery, it's one of the most rewarding things in the world to get through mental illness and come out the other side. And be able to say to other people, there is hope. There is a chance that you too can recover. That feeling is worth every day of struggling to put a fork to my mouth.
Wow, that's amazing.
Thank you so much for talking to us today. It's just all I've been getting the last minute is talking about, am I supposed to be putting on a compliment from Dan?
Yes.
Theme song on this point. Should we put it in?
Can you do it though? First of all, think about whether you can actually say a compliment.
I'm just going to seat in my pants.
You
So
could,
here's the song.
What? Watch out. Watch out. It's a compliment from Dan. Oh, okay, I did not get it.
I just wanted to thank you so much for spending time with us. You have an incredible amount of insight into this, and what's important is that you're open and honest, and you have not just that lived experience, but you also have the knowledge to back it up, which is, I think, I know from my perspective, I don't have that yet when it comes to this topic.
You're fine.
And on a lot of other topics to do with autism, which is partly why I'm doing this podcast, is because I want to educate myself as well. And I knew we're going to need people like yourself to come in and give us their time and their wisdom.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm really grateful that you invited me onto this podcast. And as you can probably tell, it's a topic that I know a lot about, but I'm also very passionate about recovery and giving people hope. And if people walk away with one thing, I'd like them to know that it is possible to come out the other side of an eating disorder and have a healthy and happy life, whether you're autistic or not. That is something that's very hard to believe when you're in the middle of recovery sometimes. I found a book the other day about eating disorders, where I'd actually crossed out in red the line that said recovery is possible. And yet now I say it myself, and I think that that's a really important message to sort of leave it on.
Absolutely. Any compliments you'd like to offer, Bianca? I know they come easy to you, but...
Oh, cool. Oh, well, no, I'm just really fascinated. And I'm sure I'll actually have more questions later. So maybe we could actually put them on the Facebook page if anyone does have any questions and you would like to answer them. But that wasn't a compliment, was it? No, well,
Like a compliment that you're willing to let me answer them.
well, there you go. I am willing to let you answer some questions.
Yours.
No, that's fantastic. It's amazing. And also, like as a little side note, you also have a range on your Spoonfuls of Whimsy website, a Christmas range of art that you've created that people can purchase.
Yep. Yeah, I'll have the store back up and running soon. So
Look at me. I seem like I'm a professional here.
I know. Jeez.
All right.
I got to lift my game.
Yeah. All right. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you very much.
yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.